Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Recruiter Hangout. Thank you for joining us as we meet with big billers and experts who are paving the way in the recruiting space. My name is Stephanie Redmond, and I'm one of the internet marketing gurus here at Viral Marketing. I'm joined today by my co-host and partner, Bill Vick. Bill is well known and revered in the recruiting world. He also happens to be the best Northern Italian cook in the Dallas area, fun fact.
True.
Joining us today, yep, exactly. Joining us today from Canada is David Perry. Over the last 30 years, David has mastered the art of recruiting and is known for his unconventional tactics. So much so that the Wall Street Journal actually gave him the nickname the Rogue Recruiter. Recently, David was the keynote speaker at a TEDx conference in Romania, and just yesterday finished putting the final touches on the book Executive Recruiting for Dummies. Congratulations, David. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll never write another book. I swear.
So he says now.
And publicly, yes, it's done. It's done.
Well, I have to add, David, in addition, just because can you believe that we've known each other over 20 years now? You realize
the
that?
only person I've known almost as long as you is Mark Aluska. He says hi, by the way.
To Mark, I said hi right back at him. But here you are, all this time. You've done over $300 million in business. You have written a bestseller series in the Dummies guide for careers, 1, 2, and 3. You've now got a dynamite gangbuster book on recruiting that I would personally highly recommend to anybody listening to this. It's excellent. Excellent.
Thank you.
And here you're incredible. If I was going to define, I'm going to use this word, a Renaissance recruiter, it's you, because you do so many things so well, and you do them with grace and excellence, and that's the only way I can describe it. And it's just my pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate those kind words.
They're true ones. So I want to start off, if I may, and I'd like to get kind of your side of you in that 20,000-foot view of David Perry. You know, who are you? How did you get in this business? And the early days, the mid or later days, how did you come about writing a book, as you have, like it's what now, 4 books, bestsellers, big publishers? I mean, real books, not Kindle books, but real books. And you've done a great job with them. Your recruiting business continues to hum. You're just a Toastmaster's Toastmaster. All of these things are kind of coming together. How did it happen?
I went to the Arctic when I graduated university. When I got out of McGill, I went to the Arctic. And in the Arctic, I decided I was going to work for one of 3 companies. And your listeners have probably never heard of any of them. One is Canadian Tire, a big retailer up here. Consumers Distributing, another big retailer up here, or McDonald's. Went to the Arctic, came back, had a good time, saw an ad for Consumers Distributing, applied, got the job. Came home at the end of the first day, and I said, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And I tried to get another job. I was there for 3 years, okay, and it was. I got degrees in economics and industrial relations. I won the Sword of Honor. You know, when I did my boot camp as an officer, I actually thought I had some skills and some abilities, and it was a humbling experience to apply for all these jobs and get nowhere. And one day I happened to read Dick Bowles' book, What Color's Your Parachute? Now, we all know Parachute. Everybody knows Dick. And I sat down and I said, this is interesting. And I actually made up a workbook. And a bunch of my other fellow managers in this company, it's a national company, we all hated our jobs. I mean, it was fun with the public, and it was an interesting place to work, but the management of this organization was a disaster. I got an MBA in what not to do in business. So anyway, long story short, we decided to market each other. So on our lunch hours, we literally closed the door to our office. I was the manager of the store and had 400 some odd employees, and I'd market my fellow employees and some of my fellow managers. And I got good at it. I actually placed 21 of my own people. And I decided, I could do this for a living. That was my first mistake, Bill. So I went around to all the different executive search firms. This is 1985. Around all the executive search firms, the personnel agencies, every single one of them rejected me out of hand because I didn't have any direct sales experience. And at that time, I didn't know what direct sales experience had to do with what I essentially thought was an HR function. I do now. I get it. But this one guy, 12 interviews later, he says to me, he says, listen, you really want the job, show up on Sunday morning, 5 o'clock, as I'm going out the door at my house for a jog, and the job's yours. So I did. He opens the door on Sunday morning. He says, what are you doing? I said, well, you told me. He said, oh, my God, fine. So I started, and my first day, I said, where's my client list? And you know the joke. He threw the yellow pages at me, and I said, where's my list of candidates? And threw the white pages at me, and I said, training, and he tossed me, the Tony Bruno tapes. And he says, have at it. And I'm going, oh, my God, you've got to be kidding. Anyway, long story short, I worked. I worked on a $500 a month draw, a month. I was getting married, and I worked really hard. And the weekend before I'm going to get married, my boss takes me aside and takes all the employees and says, toasts my upcoming nuptials, and closes the door when everybody leaves. And he says, by the way, if any of your deals close when you're on vacation or when you're on your honeymoon, you don't get credit for it. And I said, what are you, nuts? Anyway, we had a conversation, and as I ran down the hall and I told the girls, I said, don't tell Gary if anything, if anything closes, don't tell him, right? And I go away. I come back, and 3 of my deals have closed, and he owes me 50% of $84,000. We had a discussion. I still call it a discussion, wherein he fired me because he said I just got lucky. So I walked down the street and started with another search firm about a week and a half later. And I was at that search firm for 2 years, and my first year I was Rookie of the Year. It was the most depressing thing I'd ever experienced in my life. I billed $99,000, and I was Rookie of the Year. That wasn't what was depressing. What was depressing is they hadn't given out that award for the previous 5 or 6 years. And $99,000 did not seem like a lot of money to me, not considering I was sold this $100,000 a year opportunity by these 5 other guys, right? Fast forward, month 3, I'm the only guy left other than the manager. Everybody else is gone. And he hates me. He's a new boss, and he just hates me. And he tells me how useless I am every single day. Didn't know that he knew my father, and he and the 2 of them went back 20 years in the Navy, and that's where all this came from. But I stayed for another year, and in my second year, I wasn't there a full year. I was there from January until end of September. I built $758,000, and I left because I got out of that $758,000. I kept 52. And I just thought, this is not fair. I mean, I didn't know what anybody else was making, but it just didn't seem fair. So I convinced my wife to sell the property that she and her 2 sisters had inherited from their parents and invest in the business. And so did her sister, invested in me, and so did my mother, actually. And that started Perry-Martel International back in 1988. Wow. And that was my first stroke of luck. My second stroke of luck was I'm in Rochester, and I have a $20 marketing budget for the 1988. I found this bizarre book on sale called Guerrilla Marketing. You know where I'm going.
Oh, Jay Levinson, absolutely.
And I picked up Jay's book and I read it, and who didn't figure that 20 years later we'd be doing this stuff? But his tactics were, phenomenal and cost me nothing. It's just a lot of chutzpah and hustle, right? So that's how I ended up in the business. And that's how my firm started.
That's incredible. And that brings you kind of mid side, where here you are, you're a big biller, you're knocking down significant numbers, and had this growing, burgeoning business that was now becoming international in scope, and you decide to write some books. How did that happen? Why did you write those books?
You want the whole story? You want the truth?
Yep.
I can make it shorter than I.
Nothing but the truth. Nothing but the truth.
Well, that's and I always say that. I always tell the truth because I'm not smart enough to remember anything else. It's just I'm married, right? 30 years. It's just easier. No matter what happens, it's just easier. So we live on the Quebec side, as you said, of Ottawa in Canada. And there's been this English-French discussion that's been going on for 350 years. And some people want to leave, some people want to stay. Anyway, I'm one of the rabid nationalists. I'm very pro-Canada. Not that I'm anti-Quebec, because I live in Quebec, but I'm a pro-nationalist. So about the time that my kids are in grade school, we're trying to raise money to build English schools in the province of Quebec. There hadn't been an English school built since 1968. And about the same time, Nortel, one of the big tech companies in Canada, decided to do a massive downsizing because they did some major FUBAs. So they do this massive downsizing, and 8,000 people get let go. And the following week, I'm away. I come back on a Monday, and I'm following this line of people down the street because I think they're going to the British Embassy to get their passports validated. And I go past the embassy, and it's like, oh my God, they're going into my building. They stop at my door. And I walk in, I said to Nikki and Christine, I said, what's going on? I said, where have you been? I said, what? I was awake, you know that. They said, well, Nortel did this. Anyway, they did a major outplacement initiative, and the outplacement initiative consists of getting all 8,000 people into a couple of different gymnasiums and giving them a piece of paper that said, here are the top 10 recruiters in Ottawa. Go and see them. For that, they got like $3 million. They get a little bit more, but not much more than that. So I come home to all this. We got 800 and some odd people standing in line in front of our offices, and I can't handle this. This is 2000, 2001 as we're starting to go down that incline. So I, after a couple of days and not being able to get a line out, I decided to go to the bookstore and just make a collection of books to say, here, go read these books. It'll help you get a job. And I read all the books, and I went, not going to help. So I decided to write a small book, finish the book, and then I sent it to Jay Levinson and said, we'd never met. And I said, Jay, I wrote this thing. I've read everything you've ever written. I'm a disciple. I'm a believer. Would you mind taking a quick peek at this and tell me what you think? And next thing you know, he gets back to me and says, my daughter used it to get a job. I love it. How can I help? I said, can you write the foreword? And he did. And so from him, I went to Seth Godin and Guy Kawasaki and then Stephen Covey, got them all to endorse it. And we sold it online to raise money to get money to build these English schools in Quebec. And one thing led to another. Politics changed, and the good guys won. And I took the book instead and walked down to New York City and said, here's a book. It'll help. Anybody want to buy this? So Career Press bought the first one. And then I jokingly said to Jay one afternoon, I said, we should write guerrilla marketing for job hunters. He goes, yeah, that'd be a good idea. 2 weeks later, careful what you ask for, eh? 2 weeks later, I get this phone call from Michael, who's now my publicist, saying, hey, you want to do this book? I said, sure. And that's how Guerrilla Marketing for Job Hunters 1, 2, and 3 came about. It was, and I agreed to do it because I thought Jay was going to do most of the writing. I learned later that he's the brand, I'm the writer. That was a brutal lesson to learn. I got to tell you, that was hard, but good for me. But that's how the books came about, and so they were really just a publicity stunt. I just thought back then, a lot of people complain about recruiters, right? We're heartless, the whole 9 yards, right? We only call when we want something. I get all that. So I thought I'd be a good guy. And I do something to say, here you are. You're looking for a job? I can't help you, but you can read this. Go to the library and buy it, right? So it was a publicity.
How many books have 1, 2, and 3 aggregately sold? Do you have any idea?
Somewhere north of 80,000. Somewhere north of 80,000.
There's 80,000 lives that you have personally reached out and touched and redirected and sometimes saved. That's what that means.
Yeah. I had a friend not too long ago phrase it exactly that way, because it's ironic. It's funny. I still get phone calls. I mean, Guerrilla 3 came out 2011. I still get 1 or 2 phone calls a week because my number's in the book, right? You gotta think of these things before you do them. But people are still surprised that I answer my own phone and I'll talk to people because and I always premise it by saying I'll give you 10 minutes, but in exchange for the 10 minutes, I want something for you. And then it's always pause, right? What can it possibly be? It's got to be money, right? And I always go, I want you, when you land and you've gotten a job, I said, your payback is to take 10 people take them out for coffee, put them in a room, tell them what you learned and what worked for you. That's it.
Great.
That's it.
I applaud you. That's just wonderful. Wonderful. Now, that brings us to the executive recruiting book. And give us I want you to give away all the store here, but give us enough of an idea of that book and the direction and what it does differently. Because we've all seen a lot of different kinds of books for recruiting, most of which don't really make any sense, and they're not from a true recruiter's perspective. So how did that come about, and what does it say, and what's some of the hidden messages?
That's a great question. No one's asked me that. The book came about because it's the book I always wanted to write. But, living in Ottawa, Canada, I mean, it's like, I'm not even from Hoboken, for goodness sake, right? Who cares what a guy from Ottawa thinks? So I've always wanted to write the book. This particular book, I needed the platform, which I got by doing all the Guerrilla stuff and the speaking. So what I did is I phoned up my editor at Wiley and said, okay, it's John Wiley and Sons. I'm ready to do this book called Lead, Dominate, Prosper. It became Hiring Greatness. But and what it was I wanted to take a story. I wanted to take my 1,000th search, because at that point, I'd done 1,000 executive level search. Well, I'd done 1,000 searches, about 700 of them executive level. And at that point, I had 3 people not work out, because I have a 1-year guarantee. I mean, I went into Perry-Martel. My differentiator was most people had a 30, 60, sometimes a 90-day guarantee. Mine was a year. Why a year? Because when I started, I had nothing to lose, right? But when you think that way, well, you know how tough it is to do a search, right? It's tough enough to do it the first time right. You never want to do it again. So everything that I did in terms of the tools and the background and the thinking was designed so that I only had to do this one time. So I got hold of Wiley and I said, I want to do the book, and it's going to be a story book. Per se, because it's just, the first 7 chapters and the first 4 or 5 pages are the story of my 1,000th search, where I had this guy call me up out of the blue from California after reading the Rogue Recruiter piece in the Wall Street Journal, and introduce himself and tell me that he had hired 2 of the largest search firms in America, and both of them had failed to find his replacement, and he really wanted to retire. I said, that's interesting, so I agreed to come down and meet him. I agreed to come down and meet him. So I sent him an agreement. I asked for a lot of money up front and 2 first-class airfare tickets, and he said yes. So we go down, we meet him, and that's where it starts, right? I walk into the room, and Fred's there, and I try to be nice, and he literally, takes his cane and whacks me in the side of the head. I'm now You know the story, right? You've read it, right? He whacks me in the side of the head, and it's like, okay. And I rip off his leg, and I beat him about the head and shoulders, and I said, back on. I said, okay, are we going to start? So it was the 1,000 search, and what we did through the process, what the process is that we took them through to get them who they needed so that he could retire, essentially. So it's a search that I took apart. It just happened to be my 1,000th, and it went really well. And it was interesting. The guy who was the search chair, one of the things that we do, we do this with all of our searches, is we won't work with the client directly because they usually have too much invested, right? And they won't give us enough time. So I want a dedicated person by my side from the company who's going to be the search chair and do all the stuff that I need done with them. And the guy that volunteered, because I asked kind of, was Carl Albert. And Carl happened to be one of Fred's best friends and on his board for years, and very skeptical. He was a lawyer by training to start with, and he'd already seen Fred be taken advantage of by 2 of the largest search firms in America. And they literally charged him $125,000 each and delivered nothing. And I turned around and asked him 3 questions. And you know what I did there? I asked him the 3 questions. He answered them correctly, and I said, "Okay, we'll take the search because it hasn't even been done yet." And I explained why nothing had actually been done. The concept of when you hire the largest search firms in the world, they have massive hands-off lists, and they don't tell clients this, right? But if you have a hands-off list, as you know, you can't go into those companies. Right. And these 2 companies had collectively 32,000 companies they couldn't touch. Yep. So that's 32,000 bunches of executives that Fred would never see. I didn't have that problem. My hands-off list is very, very small. So that's the book, and it's from A to Z, what we did, the relationship that we developed, and how I took them through the process of figuring out who they were, what they needed, and then how we went about going and getting the people that they needed who weren't necessarily looking for a job. And that's our secret, right? The whole concept of the abundance mentality, the abundance mentality, as far as we're concerned, everybody is available all the time. I don't think I've run an ad, honest to goodness, I haven't run an ad in 20 years. And the only reason I did 20 years ago is because the client forced me, and I made him take care of all the results.
Dave,
But,
I'm going to ask you a question because I want to make sure this is a really important point you're touching on. You've hit a couple of points, but this is one of that I want to kind of dwell on a little bit. Many different words, many recruiters have fallen into this, what I call the LinkedIn conundrum, where all of a sudden, instead of recruiting, they become post and pray people.
Yeah.
They start posting jobs, and then they kind of sit back and wait, and nothing happens. So they post more jobs, and they blame it on the Boolean searching and or the market, or nobody answers their phones. What you're saying and what I hear you saying, it's the same thing I've heard, by the way, from lots of other big billers, is you're building relationships. Is that correct?
Well, you have to. And people say, well, that's kind of hard. Well, yeah, it's hard, but it doesn't take that much time, really, because if you do a little bit of research, like the first thing we did with Fred and Carl was sit down and take apart. We did a SWOT analysis. Mm-hmm. Not just a SWOT analysis of the company, but also the players inside on the board and the products and where they sat in North America. This was a plastics extruding company, okay? No one makes plastics in America anymore profitably. Fred does. And we had to figure out why. So when we did the SWOT analysis, we figured out what his strengths were, where the weaknesses were, where the technology was about to impact their business, and maybe what they should be considering in a new person as they looked. And then we went out to the market and said, where are all the skill sets? And it wasn't in plastic extrusion, because all those companies had pretty much already failed. Mm-hmm. So why would I go into a failing company to rescue somebody? I want someone that, the process we went through, it's in the book. But that's what we did. We sat down and went through that whole analysis with them, and then took all that information back, did the research, and then, literally, I think the line is actually in the book. When I was training the guy that was working with me at the time, he believed in LinkedIn. He ran that ad. It was like 700 plus resumes and responses he got. And he spent a good 5 or 6 weeks going through them, and he came up with the best of the 6 best ones. And I thought they were horrible.
It's called the best of the worst. That's also the average.
It was bad. It was so bad. Anyway, and it was so funny. I came up with one. And I came up with one. Well, I came up with one because I decided to circumvent this process, because he was much older than me. He got at least 15 years on me, and he used to be a client. So he came in to teach me what I didn't know, even though he didn't know what I knew. Anyway, I just made a list of the top 10 manufacturing organizations in Milwaukee, and called up the chairs of the board and said, hey, my name is, and I'm looking for, and I know you know who that is.
Can you help me? Mm-hmm.
Can you give me some guidance here? And of course they're going to give me guidance. Who wouldn't give me guidance, right? I mean, this is what we do for a living, right? We make friends.
David, isn't it amazing? It's amazing to me. I can't get over it. Because I talk to people every day. I talk to people like you. I talk to a lot of people that wish they could be like you. And without exception, I'm hearing this, well, gee, nobody answers the phone, or, well, I'm getting all this response from LinkedIn, or all these other weak excuses on why they're not making money. The big billers I know, and I've talked to, and as you know, and we both know, I know a lot of them, yep. And we all speak the same language. And without exception, they're all saying the same thing. When I say, well, what are you doing? It's just what you just said. Hey, I stay on the phone and I build relationships. And that's the crux of the beginning of your book, because you did a technique I call a flip. And a flip is you reverse roles. You became buy me, not let me buy you. You weren't selling yourself. You were letting them buy you. And to buy you, they had to sell themselves. You let the client become the customer in many ways. So it was kind of an interesting play that you did. It was, I read through that and I kind of interpreted that. That's what I saw. I saw that flip take place. And the flip is the secret, I think, of many good recruiters, great recruiters, as you are.
Thank you. Yeah, and it was fun. And I ended up with one guy. And I mean, you know what I did, right? They all laughed at me. Well, 4 or 5 of them. Stephanie doesn't know the story, but 4 or 5 of the people that I talked to ended up saying, well, this is the guy, and then they laugh because they said, but he's retired, blah, blah, blah. And I'm thinking, okay, so I get to know a little bit more information about this guy. And finally, I go, how old's Jim? And they said, oh, he's like 56. Like, he's nothing. He's a kid, right? He's a kid. So I said, oh. So I literally sat for probably a day and a half trying to figure out how to do this. And then one morning, just out of frustration, I dialed his name. I dialed his number, and I said, hey, Jim, you tired of painting the walls and all the rooms, or all of your honeydew tasks done? And I can't remember exactly what he said, but it's in the book. He says, who is this? And I said, well, my name is David Perry. Sorry, let me introduce myself. I said, I'm a lousy salesman, and I am. Let me tell you about myself.
You're a brilliant salesman.
I'm calling you because, and he said, well, tell me about the job. I said, no. That's where this all falls apart for me. I do not have the verbal acuity to do this justice. Here's what I'm going to do. I got a 5-page document that tells you the who's, the what's, the where's, and the whys of this organization and the opportunity. I'd like to email it to you. I said, and when you got 5 minutes, of free time, and you're not painting anymore, give it a read and see what you think. And he goes, I mean, we're good friends now, but big bear of a man. And I hung up, and I sent him the stuff. And he called back a couple of days later. He goes, yeah, okay. Yeah, the painting's pretty much done, and there's not much else I can do here. And I said, well, let's have a conversation. So we flew into Milwaukee, and we met these 6 people, 7 actually, with Jim, and the 6 that Michael wanted, and he hated Jim, hated him, didn't, and he came for the interview, right? Didn't wear a tie, had a vest on or a jacket like I do today, and didn't have a tie on. And he's a big barrel of a man, deep voice. And he asked all these questions, and afterwards, Mike said, oh, I don't like him. I said, were you nuts? Anyway, long story short, he asked all the right questions, right? He asked the questions. We gave him the answers. We'd done all the work ahead of time. We knew he was the ideal candidate. We already knew that. We just had to get him to look at it and ask the questions so that he trusted us enough to enter into the discussion. And that's all search is. I'm doing this chief media relations and strategy officer for a client in New York City. I'm cold calling because I don't know them. The VPs and GMs of AMC, Warner, NBC, all the television stations, because they have the skills and the connections to promote this particular organization and their technology. And it's the same thing. I got 2 phone calls back today from the heads of studios in New York City going, I don't know who you are, but that was an interesting voicemail message you left. And, we should at least have a conversation. And that's all we want to do, right? You start the conversation.
See, David, it's such an important point you're making, because that's the crux that I see as the problem facing today's recruiters. Now, just to whet the appetite of those listening, if you're comfortable talking about it, can you ballpark the fee of that plastic extrusion company? What would the fee be for you on something like that?
I think it was 130,000 plus
for one placement.
For one placement. Yeah, I mean, and last year. So to give you an idea of the range that we play in, and it's all the same process, right? It's all the same process. The lowest salary we negotiated last year was $161,000. The highest was $4.2 million, and it's the same process throughout. Mm-hmm. It's figuring out who they are, understanding what's in it for them, creating enough interest to engage them in a conversation, because people are busy and no one wants to be sold to. I mean, you can't sell me. I'll buy. I love to go into a store and
that's what you did with the plastic extrusion company. Right? You didn't sell, you let them buy.
Exactly. And that to me is the secret. And the challenge I find in the industry, and I've been through Tony Bruno's stuff, and I love Pete Lefkowitz's stuff, and I was just talking to him a couple of days ago. He's in the new book. I understand how to sell. The challenge is that most people that are recruiters are transactional, and they sell in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And they sell an opportunity or a widget. They don't sell or try to create a relationship. And you can't sell anything today. It's not like the 1980s and the 1990s when we started this whole industry. You could sell then because this was all novel. But everybody has been called now by a recruiter at least 50 times in their career and have been pitched. And most of them have been pitched poorly. And as soon as they hear your voiced intonation start to rise, they just turn off and it's a click, right? So and people try to, and I have a lot of younger recruiters that I'm asked to work with, and they're great people. But when they sense something going wrong, they start talking faster, as if getting it all in is going to give them that one last shot, and they just, what people need, in my opinion, what people need to do is understand the difference between a good recruiter and a great recruiter. Because I know you're eventually going to ask me. A good recruiter knows how to recruit. A great recruiter understands the DNA of the organization he's working for. I often say to companies, if all your recruiter does is bring you great people, fire them. Because you can find great people anywhere. But the difference between understanding how that great person fits in the organization with the rest of the team, that's the secret. Because anybody can hire. In fact, we do this in America every year. In turnover in North America has remained between 22 and 24.5% for the last 3 decades. Hello, there's no reason for that. Why we continue to get it wrong, and I think we continue to get it wrong is because it's easy to hire. It's hard to keep good people. So with that in mind, and it's hard to break old habits, right? Everybody wants somebody now. And I have this discussion I go through with clients a lot. I say, if you need to solve tomorrow, I'm not the guy. I'll solve it for the next 10 years. I mean, the longest standing candidate I have now has been in his firm for 23 years. I plugged a hole for a construction company that was about $400 million 23 years ago, and they were looking for a director of public relations and marketing, and they'd hired probably a dozen young things over the previous 10 years, and they all lasted 6 months to a year. Didn't have any impact on the business. Hired this guy. It was a hell of a fight to get him through the CEO who essentially screamed at me on Christmas Eve when I was in New York City, and I told him we were going to have to pay him $150,000. And he said, I'd never paid any of them more than 60. I said, I know, but you keep getting them in bunches, so this is actually cheaper. And so we're going to hire one. And, that company's now doing $3.6 billion. Now, is it all the one guy? Absolutely not. But this one guy has
He's impacted a lot.
Oh, massive. In fact, he was the only non-family member to get shares in this company in 50 years. He was the first guy. But that's the difference between sitting down and actually understanding their business. And that's what a great recruiter does. And sometimes a great recruiter has to say, no, I'm sorry. I can't do that. I've just turned down a client who I love to hire a CEO. I said, can't do it.
Would it be safe, and would you agree if I said good recruiting, much like good selling, is transparent?
Oh, absolutely. Because I'm not a good salesman. I'm not. I'm a very good listener, and my economics degree, with a minor in statistics, of all things, taught me to be analytical. So I actually ask questions and listen, and then ask another question. And I'm the first one to go, I don't understand. So you're the expert on this. I'm just a conduit between you and the marketplace. So explain this to me so that I get the significance. And unfortunately, most recruiters, in my opinion, are not taught to do that. If they were, I think we'd have a different. I think we'd have a different society, because we'd be able to line people up and put them in the right roles a lot faster.
How long do you think it takes as a recruiter to make that transition? Because it's not a thunderclap; it's a process of going from being a recruiter to becoming a good recruiter to becoming a great recruiter. How long do you typical? And if such thing applies as typical, I'm not sure it does.
That's a great question. I got a bunch of friends in this business still. I'd say 3 to 5 years. And I say that because I know full well that the life expectancy of a recruiter in the industry is still 4 to 6 months. In 99% in the last 4 to 6 months. They get in, they do 1 or 2 deals with people, the friends that they have, and then the third deal, they take that job and they're gone.
It's like Avon Cosmetics. They hire people to sell their friends and go to the next one. Yes.
Correct. And this is the industry. And I think last year it was $500 billion globally.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as an industry, I think it's time that we start to put some rails down so that clients get what they need, and the entire, I know this sounds airy-fairy, but the entire society starts to advance. Because as recruiters, we're in this wonderful position to actually line up. You know, you've got this opportunity to change the world in some capacity, and you need this kind of skill set. And as a recruiter, you go out looking for that. Well, if you actually find it, then they're successful, right? If you don't, somebody else is. And I find it's a real waste that we're not able to do that more systematically. And that's one of the major reasons.
You know, I've struggled with that question for years. And if you look at 10 people who become recruiters today, and this is the numbers I used to work with, I think I still apply. At the end of the year, 2 are left.
Yeah.
At the end of the second year, 1's left. And the third year, it's 50-50 on that one. Yeah. And I think part of that, it's an intense business, and it's a binary business. You succeed or fail. There's no in between. There's no gray area. You're successful or not. I think part of that is because training is essentially weak for most firms, and the hiring process is a warm body, fill the chair, and get it on with the process. Kind of like what you were describing with this company that's got all the young things coming in. They turn them like clockwork, and they make $60,000 a year, and they get another one, and so they're really paying probably the equivalent of $180 a year, not $160 as your guy got. But he's there for 23 years. I think it's the same thing with recruiters. The good ones, and it's not just that they're tenacious, the good ones that do well stick. And I think a lot of it's been happenstance. I don't see anything out there, and I agree with you, there's people like Peter Lefkowitz or a number of people that are great trainers. They really are.
Oh, I love Peter.
Yeah, John Bartos does a great job, and I've done the whole list of many of them, Bob Marshall. But nobody's out there training big billers because you can get the basics and the fundamentals. It's like being a car mechanic. A lot of people can become car mechanics and do a good job at it, but the ones that go to Daytona are kind of the top of the pack. It's the same thing in recruiting. I think it's easy. That's a hard word, wrong word. I think a lot of people can become recruiters earning $100,000 a year or better. It's not a trick science. But the ones that go into the big leagues, like you, $800,000, $1 million a year in production, the ones I've talked to, there's a consistency. They're fun to talk to. Secondly, they're perceptive and intelligent. Third, they understand the process and they don't make a big deal out of it. It's kind of instinctive. They do it. And they've learned that learning isn't talking, it's listening.
Correct. Yeah. Everybody should listen to what you just said. And I'm so sorry, and Stephanie's laughing at us. I'm so sorry that it took me so long to figure it out. But a lot of this stuff was trial and error. There's not a lot of books available that you can read from. I learned stuff from Zig Ziglar, who I really admired and spent a fair amount of time with. Guys like Seth Godin and Jay, in terms of understanding the psychology and the dynamics of human beings. And that's what real sales is. If you want to put it if you want to put it in a can, that's what it is. It's not taught anywhere. That's one of the other big issues. And my fundamental beef with most of the sales books that are on the shelf, after having written like 7 books now, most books can be done in 25 to 30 pages. That's the message, everything included, followed by 180 pages of here's what I told you. And that's a real waste. It turns people off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have been a subscriber to these book summaries for decades,
Mm-hmm.
because I can get in, find something, I can read it in like 2 minutes. I can read 10 of these a month easily, just waiting for the something to happen in between visits at offices. But I will read it. I'll find the one or two points that are salient, and then either I go and buy the book and consume the entire thing, or I save myself 3 days of reading because it's the same stuff over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
And what I wanted to do with this Hiring Greatness was lay down the story that I did, much in the same, I hope, in the same vein as The Goal. The book, The Goal, and one of my favorite books, and I'm sure you've read this, Winning Through Intimidation.
Oh, sure. That's what they used to call me, as Mr. Intimidation.
I loved his book. So that was the idea, was to write a story that people could relate to and then do the how-to behind it, so that I could leave behind something that says, okay, so I was here, I did this stuff, here's my contribution. But after we finished writing Hiring Greatness, it's like, okay, so one of my friends said, well, you didn't really get into the meat. I said, yes, I did.
Oh, yeah.
Not enough. So that's how the executive recruiting for Dummies came along.
I'm going to go back for once, because what we're saying here, I think, is just, it's really important for people that want to move from good to great. It really is important. And if you sit and look at, and I'm going to use Viral, which Stephanie can't talk. She has her mic muted, so we can talk amongst.
She's laughing at us.
She's laughing at us, but that's okay. She can't interrupt us. See, I love this company, Viral. And the reason I love it is when I was doing my research for my book, and my book's a little different. I'm trying to understand the impact that technology and demographics and mores and morals and all that, how it's shaping and changing employment, and how recruiters can capitalize on it. And that's why I've been doing all these interviews I've been doing. And as I do them, I'm hearing this consistency of stay on the phone and build relationships. And I agree with that 100%. At the same point, it says to me that if you're a small business and you are doing that and you are making those kinds of numbers, then you're not doing the other part of your business. You're in a very tactical driven business. You're not strategic. You don't have the time to kick back and worry about 6 months, a year, 5 years down the road. You're so busy today of what do you eat and kill today? Tomorrow is tomorrow. So companies like this that provide services, in this case, they provide the true essence in my mind of what marketing is all about, of reaching out and touching and tagging somebody on a consistent basis. And they're doing it with video. What do you think of that kind of a concept for those recruiters moving from good to great and that aren't really doing all the pieces of their business? They're very tactical and they're making numbers today, and tomorrow may come and may not, but today they're making their numbers. How do they build their business to maintain that continuity? Viral's doing it with videos, do a great job with it. People that you and I know, like Jeremy Sizemore and Michael Petrak, Todd Govic, Sharon Hoos, they're all doing this right now, and they're doing it well, and it's successful. But what do you see? What's your view, David, of that continuity of how do you build a business and reach out? Because you're working with one of the great marketers of all times, Jay Levinson, who's Mr. Marketing. I know more than a little bit's worn off in you, and you do that yourself instinctively. How do you see those kinds of things impacting good recruiters to become great?
That's a really interesting question, and it's timely, and I'll tell you why. I wanted to do the book for a while. I needed to get off of the Guerrilla Marketing for Job Hunters bandwagon because, A lot of people thought I'd become a career coach, which is as far from the truth as is possible. And a lot of people thought I was dead because I don't do a lot of work in my own hometown. And the reason I don't do a lot of work in my own hometown is because they're used to paying, 10, 15, 20% fees, and people do the work and then they have to go fight to get paid. I'm not interested in doing that. If that's the world you want to live in, have at it. It's not mine. My clients are all stateside. They run from startups to billion-dollar companies. They pay full fee. No one ever asks a question. So what I did last year was I did $300,000 in January and turned around and said to Mark, I said, okay, we got a window here. I said, Hiring Greatness had just come out. We just banked all this money. I want to take a couple of months to do executive recruiting for dummies because I need to get out in front of the wave before we get commoditized. And as part of doing executive recruiting for dummies and Hiring Greatness, we came up with a whole series. We haven't shot any of them yet. So it's so funny that we're talking about this. We came up with a series of 104 different videos. They're going to be 1.5 to 2 minutes long. We'll get around to doing them soon. But what I'm trying to do is educate the client, because the client doesn't want to do what we do. They don't have time. No one has time anymore, right? I mean, the structures are so flat now that no one has time to do this stuff. But what they do want is they want to understand that you can do it. And everybody's marketing says they're wonderful and they hire the best and the brightest, but everybody's experience in industry has been, no, that's not quite what we got from them and them and them and them. So gaining trust is the secret, in my opinion, the secret ingredient for a recruiter is to gain the trust and the confidence of a prospect, not even a client, a prospect. And you can do that by writing a book. You can do that by teaching courses and giving speeches, or you can do that on a much larger level by embracing technology that we're talking about today with the webinars and the video. Yep. And that is exactly where we're headed. And I will pick apart all the stuff in all my books and hand it out for free. Because, I had a client ask me not that long ago why I would do all this and tell everybody. And my answer was pretty simple. I said, there's a difference between, getting the operating manual or reading the operating manual and piloting the spaceship. If you're a Trekkie, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely.
You can get the book. You can read it.
Yeah.
Taking it out of dock and taking it into the, anyway. And that's what this is all about. So my objective for the next 5 years is to teach as many people as possible all of this stuff and show them why it works. A couple of things I think will come out of it. People will get what they want in terms of clients. Companies will get who they need, and they'll prosper. And by doing that, they're going to save money, and they're going to be able to invest money in new people, new facilities, new products, and they may even turn around and get stuck and go, oh, we got to find that guy that wrote that book, and I might get hired. But at the end of the day, Hiring Greatness as a book comes out in Chinese in June.
Wow.
Of next year.
Wow.
And I wrote Hiring Greatness so that North American companies could have a competitive advantage over what's coming from China. Not in my wildest dreams when I pitched it as Good to Great meets Sun Tzu's The Art of War, did any of us think that anybody on the other side of the planet was listening going, oh, we need that. So, the Chinese rights to the book had been bought. And what I thought would be an uneven playing field is about to become an even playing field. Yeah. And there's more of them, and they're more driven than we are here in North America by a long shot. Because
last week they became the largest consumer of Apple's apps. Very interesting.
Wow. And you see, and their education system isn't as mired in the processes that we have in North America for teaching children and students. They're far more into using technology and taking shortcuts and taking risks than we are here in North America. And for goodness sake, we invented democracy. We invented innovation. And
what you're saying, David, really, to me, is good recruiting is universal. Good recruiting has its own language, and the language of success, and it applies everywhere. Maybe you speak it in Chinese or Russian or Romanian or English, but it's the same language. And the same things, maybe there's some nuances and cultural differences that apply, But what I hear you saying, it's still about building relationships, building trust, understanding processes, and doing a SWOT, if you will, on each candidate and each company client you work with, and understanding those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that exist. I think if you do that, it doesn't matter the language you're speaking the recruiting language. And that's a very interesting thing.
Well, I akin recruiting a lot to dating and getting married. I mean, I don't know how many women you asked before Pat said yes. I only asked one. I had to ask. It took a while. I had to ask a couple times, but she relented. But my point was, I did all my homework. I built the relationship, and when I went to do it, it was very clear. Here's what's in it for you. She still said yes. That's a whole other interesting thing. But here's what's in it for you. And this is the same thing in recruiting. Before you ever pick up the phone, knock on a door, you need to be able to articulate to the person who's going to open the door or pick up the phone who you are and why they should give you 7 seconds of their time. And when you take the time to understand their situation, and LinkedIn is great for that. I mean, you can do so much research on people, right? Find out what their likes are, where they went to school, if we have anybody in common, all that kind of stuff. You can do all that research now so much easier than we used to do it in the old days. I mean, we didn't have any of this stuff. I had a research team of 7 back in the 90s. 7. I replaced them all with Zoom info.
Interesting. I love your video, by the way, which I just shared with all my friends that you did for Zoom.
The shark one, I love them, and they're just so much fun, And they're good people, and it's a good product. That's for sure.
Well, Stephanie, I know we're running a little late on time, but I say, David, I have to tell you what a thrill this has been for me, and it's been fun, but it's also been really insightful, because you see around the curve and around the corner. You really do. More importantly than that, you don't just see it, you do it. And I think it's pretty cool. So I want to thank you so much.
Thank you both very much. I hope you do something really interesting with this and it helps somebody else.
Good.
Well, thank you.
I look forward to sending you a copy of the book. You're welcome.
Yes. I would love to read it as well. I'll buy it, but I would love to read it as well.
My publisher likes you.
Yes.
And I'll get a quarter. Yay!
Yay! Awesome. Well, thank you guys so very much for your time today. I really loved listening to everything you had to say. And of course, to piggyback on what Bill had to say, you're right. Building and nurturing your network is so crucial to the success of the recruiting practice. And I mean, a lot of industries, honestly, it's really the bread and butter at the core of everything. And viral marketing can help with that. That is our bread and butter. So if anybody is interested in learning more about what we do, check us out at getviral.com, viral with a Y. Thank you guys so much and have a wonderful day.